Hello and welcome to Money Mind. A milestone reached in the White House as the US president marks his 100th day in office. But what does it mean for you and your money here in Asia? I'll be putting that question and a lot more to my very special panel of guests. In his first address to the US Congress, Joe Biden has proposed a new spending plan to support jobs, education and social care. If passed, the package will be the largest overhaul of US benefits in half a century. The US Federal Reserve has left interest rates and its bond buying program unchanged. The central bank is keeping its easy monetary policy, despite noting that economic activity and inflation are both on the rise. The global chip shortage is getting worse. More companies are warning of the fallout from production cuts and lost revenue. They include car makers Honda, BMW and Ford, as well as tech giants Apple and Samsung. Employment in Singapore has grown for the first time since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, unemployment continued to ease, but is still above pre-pandemic levels. The Monetary Authority of Singapore says the country's GDP could grow more than 6% this year, but MAS warns that growth is likely to remain disparate across sectors. It's been a busy 100 days for US President Joe Biden. April the 30th marks his 100th day in office as US President. Now, his focus so far has been on getting Americans relief and stimulating the US economy with a massive $1.9 trillion COVID-19 aid package. Now, the signs point to a rebound for the US economy, but observers here in Asia have also given the president high marks for his emphasis on international collaboration and on climate change. So is America back? And what does it mean for Asia? Well, to discuss these questions and a lot more with me today, I have a very special panel of guests. They are Deborah Elms. She is Executive Director at Asia Trade Center. Mr. Song Seng Woon, he is economist at CIMB Private Banking. And joining us virtually all the way from Manila in the Philippines is Victor Andreas Manhit. He's CEO and Managing Director at Strat-Based Group. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you here today. In his first 100 days in office, Joe Biden's managed to reach his goal of vaccinating over 100 million US citizens. He's also managed to successfully been able to put in place some policies to get relief to Americans, but has he gotten the economy back up on track to where he'd like it to be?
The Biden administration has been fulfilling its campaign promises of focusing on domestic challenges like the COVID. And this has given confidence, I think, on the part not only of the public, but the general market. We have seen also his effort to bring about a strong stimulus package. And now even with the infrastructure proposal that he has laid down to Congress, this will really be a big boost. The challenge really, will this all happen in the next few months? And that will really drive a strong economic rebound for the US.
Seng-Woon, a US economy running hot, is that good for us?
Well, it's running hotter than where we have seen, in a sense, lockdown recession of 2020. But I think if you look at the statistics, it is still below where it had fallen from. So from the US standpoint, it's right. New administration is channeling effort on the fiscal side. Remember, all this while it has been on the monetary front that a lot of effort have been concentrated in. That's right. So it needs the other engine. So yes, engine firing on both monetary front, fiscal front, and obviously with the rebound and more consumer-facing activities being resumed, it's better for us as export-oriented Asian economies like Singapore, all the way to Taiwan, Korea, and to China, of course.
The US has pledged to cut its emissions by half. This will be what Joe Biden wants. This is what he has said he wants to do at COP26. That's being held later on this year in November. Is this a sign that America is back in the driving seat as far as climate action is concerned?
I think it's unclear. I would say many people cheered his announcement and the holding of a summit that he held to bring together people to discuss what the plans are and to suggest that his administration certainly has a different view on climate than the previous administration. But I think where the jury remains out is on the delivery of that promise. And then the other challenge, which is true for Biden and any subsequent administration, I think, is how much does the world trust that the United States will maintain those pledges even if we have another change in administration. Before we had Donald Trump in office, I think it was very rare for people to assume that the United States would flip-flop so completely on a variety of topics. Having seen that happen, go from sort of one general policy to a completely different set of policies, and then back again under Biden, is causing some concern among allies and adversaries over how much the U.S. policy that's announced at any given day will hold through into the future. And I think that's the big question for me on climate.
Since he's become president, Joe Biden, though, has made it clear that he wants that international collaboration. He's pro sort of supporting allies in their positions as well. And Seung-Won, this issue of alliances, trade alliances are important. So far, he's shown that he's got this rather tepid enthusiasm for them. He hasn't been so much on board.
I think going forward, we are seeing him, he's going to be making his first trip to Europe, to mend fences, I suppose, so to say, and perhaps he will be focusing his energy and attention into Asia as well. So I think this is the next phase of his policy. But then again, we'll be heading into midterm elections again. So to what extent domestic politics, I think Deborah brought up a good point in terms of how consistent US policies are, whether it's on the domestic front or the external front. A lot really now depends on how politics play out in the coming days, etc.
Victor, I want to bring you back into the conversation. While all of this has been playing out, while domestic politics in the United States has sort of taken us down one road, China has been making these big deals with countries all over the world. What does that mean for America's position in all of this?
As expected, given the challenges that the Biden administration inherited, domestic policy has been their priority. But I think as they settle and overcome these domestic challenges, especially COVID-related, and as they recover, you can expect them to be more coherent in terms of preparing for us or proposing an economic policy or trade policy with regards to the Indo-Pacific region. What we have seen is really a more security-centric policy initiative this past 100 days.
Deborah, do you think his pushback on China is going to achieve very much or much traction for Joe Biden?
In Washington, certainly. So, you know, one of the things that's been striking about the last few years in DC is the extent to which the policy community, so that's government, it's businesses, it's NGOs, it's general public, has shifted very strongly and very sharply against China in the last couple of years. And so I think Biden's efforts to push on China has a strong domestic backing. The challenge that they face, I mean, they face many challenges, but one is that the configuration of governments to address that in the Indo-Pacific, sort of their Indo-Pacific Quad, is under stress right now. So the hard part, if you're Joe Biden and his team, is you want to push back against China. You would like to build a coalition to do so. But your coalition has got other priorities as well. And so how do you then balance your own domestic needs for doing something on China with an international policy setting that is not particularly helpful for that right now, with ongoing and clearly rising concerns about what the pandemic will do to key allies in the region? And I think that is the real problem for the Biden team as they try to imagine what U.S. trade policy or U.S. economic policy or U.S. foreign policy should look like towards Asia, and in particular towards China.
It's going to be a challenging balancing act, getting that together. It's time for a break right now here on Money Mind, but stay with us. We'll be right back with plenty more. Welcome back to the Money Mind Exchange Forum Panel, where we're discussing Joe Biden's first 100 days as US president. So much has happened. Seung-Won, Biden's plans have given a lot of hope to the markets. We like what we see. IMF says that America may well return to growth seen that's even greater from pre-pandemic levels. Do you think that the optimism is justified?
It's really about creating jobs. So certainly in terms of the policies that have been rolled out, it's really about bringing jobs. And we have seen, obviously, the recovery on that side. We're still a few million short in terms of the actual employment back to pre-crisis level. But if we look at the measures of economic activities, both on the manufacturing side as well as service-oriented activities, things have picked up. So not a surprise on that side as we essentially put the pandemic behind. Obviously, the challenge going forward really is if the pandemic continues to be a serious concern outside, this could continue to obviously have impact and implication for even activities within the US as well. But I suppose we have moved on from the worst case. Now we are on a recovery path. Some may still be lagging behind, but generally speaking, things are moving forward.
What if you were to see inflation reach up to 2% though for America? Should we start getting a bit concerned at that point?
There's still some slack in the economy just because there's still people are without jobs. So once those jobs are being taken up, slack in the economy, whether it's on the services side, manufacturing side are taken up, then that translates into price pressure as people have more money to spend than supply of goods and services. So if that becomes more broad-based, sustainable, and start to impact on inflation expectation that shape prices forward, this is when the central bank will start to pay a bit more notice, which is why at this point, the central bank really is, we want to get jobs back. We worry about prices later. Once the jobs are back, we worry about wages and inflation later. I think we're still somewhere away from that. Fingers crossed.
So there still is some slack in the US economy, and unemployment forms a part of that. But one of Biden's proposals is, of course, the tax rate for corporate tax, bringing it back up to 28%. Not all business owners are happy about that. They say that impacts jobs in and of itself. Deb, will this reduce competitiveness in US businesses?
I would say the tax rate, even at 28%, remains competitive. I don't think businesses are failing to invest because of the tax rate. I think they're failing to invest because the economy has been so depressed. Well, I think your challenge is that you're spending a lot of money in the US to get out of the pandemic and to restart recovery, and then to put through this investment and infrastructure package. That has to come from somewhere. So I think you don't have the greatest set of options, and raising corporate taxes is one that has a fair amount of support right now, notwithstanding those corporates who would have to pay more. And so I think it will happen. The question is, of course, exactly where will they land? Because that's a debate between the White House and Congress.
The companies which are emerging with, doing innovation on green tech as an example, lots of those companies are new companies. Some of them are energy companies that are transitioning as well. They will have additional costs, additional risks in terms of competition with global competitors, global firms that may be doing similar work. So how do you anticipate this is going to impact, how Asian investors sort of where they park their money?
Maybe they can approach this in a much broader and more strategic way. If you would like to encourage this kind of investment, maybe it's good for the government of Biden as they negotiate with Congress to give some incentives for some of these green initiatives.
Sang-Won, in the past year, the issue of tariffs has been one that's been in the spotlight as well. The US sees it as leverage on China. Is there any possibility that Joe Biden's going to revisit that in the next year, in the next couple of years, lifting those tariffs?
I think Deborah pointed it out earlier in that politically it's very difficult now, primarily because on either sides, whether you're Republican or Democrat, it's just seen politically correct to be seen to be tough on China. So if you're seen to be tough on China, you must be seen to continue to maintain that pressure point as well. Otherwise, we could well see Donald Trump making a comeback again, for instance. So not so easy going forward, even if his team of advisors may prefer things to be easier. But I think it would be very difficult at this point.
Do you think that China is going to continue its march to sort of shape financial change as far as the region and perhaps even internationally?
So this is where the challenge lies in to what extent what's happening within China spill over to the rest of the world in that its consumption of goods, whether it's from Asia or the rest of the world, also move ahead. So with that economic strength obviously means political standing as well. So how it plays out, I think, will be important. At least from the Chinese standpoint, where we see is there's continued clarity with its policy. An earlier point on the US side, we don't know whether the current administration policy, whether it's on climate change or whether it is regional politics, may shift when administration change again. So this is where we know consistency, China is there, it's going to be bigger and bigger, and politically this is what they will continue to do. But elsewhere, in the West, it might not be as straightforward. So this is where I think the difficulty and challenges going forward will come from.
Well, hold that thought, Seng-Woon, because after the break, we're going to be discussing what's next post those 100 days of a Biden administration. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Money Mind Exchange panel, where we're taking a deep dive into the first 100 days of Joe Biden as US president and what it means for Asia and for the region. Victor, how will Joe Biden handle a second wave if there were to be one of COVID-19?
I think when you look at the strength of the Biden administration's first 100 days, was really they're focused on dealing with COVID. So I think they should continue to really bring the whole of the US government to focus on making sure that as they continue to expand their vaccination program, they continue to also push for these protocols, of course, safety protocols, which has been challenging, I think, in some areas in the United States.
So Seng-Woon, people are buying, they're going out there.
Yep.
We talked about this earlier. Consumers are active again. But what do you expect the Fed to do?
For the Fed, it's a question of, is this momentum going to be linear, or whether this is just rebounding from a low and things may plateau off? As we said, we are still at risk from new infections, cases around the world. There are also risks from just geopolitical issues elsewhere. So there's still plenty of risks over the horizon. The key from the US standpoint is labor market conditions strong enough for people to start spending on a sustainable basis that lead to high wages, etc., etc. How has inflation expectation changed? If it doesn't, then I think the central bank can take a wait-and-see attitude. It started to shift, then I think they will act a little bit differently. But I think it is still somewhat early at this cycle, still.
So you're confident of no earlier than anticipated action on interest rates?
Certainly not at the moment.
Not for now?
Not for now.
Okay. Deborah, there are still these challenges and concerns about where the US economy will go from here. And we do look at what Joe Biden has in his plans. And one of those things has been his idea about reshoring. He's still into that idea. It's a very Trump era idea, this idea of bringing manufacturing back to America. He's seen the gaps in supply chains and the impact that it has on the US economy. And he says he wants to redirect those supply chains. Can he do it, and should he do it?
Well, I think he's going to give it a try, because for political and economic reasons it makes sense, and he's not the only government. What he will try to do is bring reshoring back to the US, and for some companies that will work, but for many companies that will not work. The reason that they are globalized is because it suits their business processes. Whether they're making goods or services or they're engaged in investments, they are globalized for a reason. And when you then say to a firm, I want you to stop that, it's harder than people think, and often impossible to actually just pick up a factory and move it back to the US. The math doesn't work, the skills aren't there, the costs go too high, et cetera. And so it's just harder than people imagine to reshore a supply chain.
What concerns you most about where the US economy will go from here?
Well, I think we're not out of the pandemic. I think we have a very challenging domestic political situation in the US. It's very polarized. We've got a Congress that's fairly dysfunctional, and so there's politics that are a problem. the COVID remains a problem, and then the economy is still, it's doing much better, but that doesn't mean that it will stay doing much better. And then finally, although I think this administration would like to say, we will wait for the rest of the world until we're ready, the rest of the world doesn't wait for the United States. And so you have to engage on policies that you may not really want to deal with today. And so I think there's a range of risks actually attached to a Biden administration, even though they've done well for their first 100 days.
To wrap up, Victor, what does the first 100 days of Joe Biden's presidency tell us about the direction that he's taking? And what would your overall scorecard be on what he's achieved?
I think what we have seen really from the Biden first 100 days is a clear direction. Strategic goals has been made in terms of engagement around the world, but more so with the domestic policies. They have really focused on what they have promised during the election time. That's why we're seeing this economic recovery with their COVID response.
Sang-Woon, what would you hope to see on Biden's agenda, specifically in regards actions he may take vis-a-vis Asia?
For Asia, obviously, since we are anchored by China's growth, it's really about a more stable relationship with China, relationship within the Asia-Pacific region itself, to ensure, I suppose, stability rather than wild swings in statements that are directed through tweets, for instance. So that stability, I think, is the one thing that we are looking forward to, so that I can go to sleep at night and not wake up in the middle, be in shock by something. So that's kind of a resumption of normality of sorts, I think is what I continue to hope from the present administration.
There's certainly no more of those midnight tweets. Deborah, what about for you?
I think it's what you get when you have competent government. So he's staffed with people who know what they're doing, who've been there before, who understand how government works, they understand its limits. And I think what you're getting in the first 100 days is a shining example of what competence in government looks like. You've vaccinated double your target. You've rolled out a stimulus package that is well in excess of what people imagined. You've got people back to work. You've got people hopeful about the future. I think that's a fantastic first 100-day start.
Being hopeful about the future is certainly a good one for all of us to take away. We've come to the end of this special edition of the Money Mind Exchange Forum on U.S. President Joe Biden's first 100 days in the White House. It remains for me to thank my guests on the panel today, Deborah Elms, Song Sang-Woon, and Victor Andres Manhit, who came to us all the way from Manila. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.